welcome again. Again, my name is Andy Hahn, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my spiritual journey and how I came to be the founder of this work that is now called Life-Centered Therapy. We formerly called it Guided Self-Healing, but now it's called Life-Centered Therapy. So I'm going to tell you a little of my spiritual autobiography. Now, I would say my spiritual autobiography, in a sense, began when I was 9 years old. And when I was 9 years old, I remember this, I had a dream, and I woke up from the dream, and I went to my desk and I wrote down a poem, which at the time I thought was just about me. But then several years ago, a colleague said, "What is your work about?" referring to the poem. And I said, "It's about remembering." And she said, "You might want to listen to this poem from a whole different light, that this really is about your life work and not just about your personality." So I'm going to show you the poem that came to me, which clearly was what we might call a channeled poem, because a 9-year-old clearly wouldn't write a poem like this, but a grandfather might. And the dream was about a grandfather and a grandson. That's all I remember about the dream. And so the poem is called Memories, and it goes, "You remember things forgotten. You dream of tales untold. Your memory reminds you of your childhood days of old. Now you have your children, and they have children too. And all you have is memories of things you would have liked to do. Words that were never spoken come back to you like then. All the things you would have done, could you do it over again?" So for the longest time, I thought that poem was a message to me to be prepared for a certain kind of life of turning regret into remorse and dealing with my structure, which is a romantic structure, if you know the Enneagram or archetypes, that which longs for the ideal but never quite can find it. So it always is aspiring to something but never quite gets there. But then my colleague said to me, "Your work is about inviting people to remember." And I listen with what we might call the third ear. When I listen with the third ear, I say, what was that poem about on a whole other level? What is healing about? It's about remembering things that are forgotten. And when you can remember things that are forgotten, you're not fated to relive them as echoes, but you might live out a destiny where you have more choice. Because when you can remember things forgotten, you can dream of tales that were previously not told. You open to new possibilities because you're not stuck living a trance of things that you couldn't handle. So the poem really, to me, speaks about where you can find out where you're stuck. You remember things forgotten and you dream of tales untold. Your memory reminds you of your childhood days of old. And now you have your children and they have children too. So we went forward, and all you have is memories of things you would have liked to have done, but you couldn't do them because there was something you couldn't handle and integrate. And then again, we opened to new possibilities, words that were never spoken. What did you really need to say and hear if you were listening and speaking your deepest truth? Words that were never spoken come back to you like then. That there were new possibilities and you could do things differently. You can change the past. Literally, you can change the past and be free of it. So it just becomes something that you're remembering, not something that you're fated to relive. So I look at that poem as life giving me a gift and saying to me, here's what you're going to be spending your life passionately doing for yourself and inviting others into. So that's where you could say, although I didn't know it at the time, my spiritual autobiography begins. And then it moves on a few years to when I was like 11 years old, and my parents were having a dinner party, which I have to thank my mother for reminding me of this before she died, because I didn't remember the story. But they were having a dinner party, and there was this talk show host on the radio in Boston a long time ago, because this was probably the late 60s. And I even remember his name. It's Larry Glick. And he had on someone, well, I'll tell you the story. The story is that I heard them all laughing And so I, being the curious kid that I was, I walked into this dinner party with all these adults. And it became very clear to me that they were laughing at this man who had been on this radio show who believed in ESP. And they were all sort of like saying, what a ridiculous idea. And they were laughing at him. And I was listening to them for a short period of time. And I said, well, if you could see and everybody else was blind, how would you prove to them that you could see? At which point the whole dinner party went quiet, to which I thought, they don't know an answer to that question, and I just walked out. And I actually hadn't remembered that until many, many years later when my mother told me. But I think that also was speaking to, like, everything is possible. Why would you laugh at anything? Why would you judge anything? Maybe it's because of your own anxiety. And your own sense of weirdness is just things that you say, I can't handle them. Not that they can't possibly be true. So that was the first part of my spiritual autobiography when I was in elementary school. If you want to hear what happens next, join us for part 2.